right. Well, it's time for us to get started in our Bible study. There's a lot, man. There's a lot of material with this. It seems like it's not that much, but we talk about the subject matter and all the things that are, it's just so many layers to this discussion between David, Nabal, and Abigail. So we've got a lot to move through and try to, hopefully I can keep it coordinated and succinct in a way that you won't get too crazily lost because it seems to be, it depends on how deep you want to dig on this encounter. So if you want to, go ahead and turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25. And I do believe looks like, let me try, just to make sure. No, that's weird. Okay, just checking to see if I don't see it working. Oh, well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm trying to get all this stuff working. Think I get it working, and then, especially the chat. The chat I can't test without going live. So, I finally got it refreshed and everything. So, let's go ahead and have a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Our most gracious Father, thank you ever so much for this opportunity we have to be here this evening and study your word. We are very mindful of the wisdom that we can draw from it. We hope that each of us would be able to focus upon the scripture as we read it. I pray that I'll be able to present it in a way that's easily to understand and to make it a real lesson that we can take into our everyday life and be able to make it express your wisdom and your love, and so that it would create within people a curiosity to want to know more about you, Father. We ask all this in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of review. Last week we left with David in Gedi, which was a fantastic fortress or a hiding place. We looked at the geography of it. It was pretty amazing to look where they were at in the caves and the way it was kind of all these different hiding places. And Saul comes along, and we see that he goes into the same cave, walks into the same cave, goes to the bathroom. While he's going to the bathroom, they discover him, and of course David's men are trying to get him to go ahead and kill him. Take him out. Just take him out. It wouldn't have been the worst sin that David did, if you think about it. But what's interesting, and that's why I'm bringing this up, is because as we come into this next story this evening, we're going to see a real person. We're going to see somebody that is very spiritual, seeking after God's heart, but there are times and moments in even his life where he's not always doing the right thing. He's not always very spiritual first and then kind of impulsive second. Sometimes he gets it backwards. But he spares his life, and after that, then we see that Saul goes home and David scats. Now, when we look at that, it's kind of a sad thing that he had such a nice area, but he knows he can't stay there, because if he stays there, well, when Saul flips his little switch again and starts to decide, okay, I'm past this, good feelings with David, I'm going to go back and kill him, he knows where he's at. And honestly, I looked at it from a military point of view. It does kind of set him up in a trap. Box canyons work both ways. You can hide in that area, but at the same time, it kind of puts him up against the cliff and boxes him in some ways. So he knows that if he sticks around there, that Saul eventually is going to flip his switch and go the other direction and, of course, pursue him. So he's got to find another location as he does so. The sad part is it opens up in chapter 25 with the death of Samuel. And this is a historical transition when we look at the role of Samuel. We look at the time period in which he's the end of, which was the time period of the judges. He saw and brought about the new time of rule by king. The first king, he, as much as he didn't want a king, I think he finally listened to what the Lord said, and so he supported Saul. And Saul was constantly disappointed. It's also interesting, I think, that even though we only have a few accounts of, some rebuking by Saul, Samuel against Saul and correcting him, I think there was a a little bit of a counterbalance of maybe holding Saul. And now I think with the death of Samuel, yeah, it's over. I think it was really over, but I think now there's absolutely nothing with the death of Samuel. But it is a historical moment where now the judges are gone, and it comes into the time period of kings from this point forward. Now, if we look at the map, we come back to the map, it's kind of interesting. If you'll remember, and I'll try to bring this. Because if you'll look up, here's Ramah, where Samuel was. This is one of the first runs, or takes off. He goes up to where Samuel's at when this running for his life started. And he goes to Ramah where Samuel's at. And then we know that he comes back, speaks to Jonathan, and that's when the whole situation was that no, my dad's going to kill you. So we find that he keeps going further. He comes over to Adullam, the cave of Adullam. He goes to Keilah and defends it. And then he comes over and he's in the wilderness of Ziph. And at the wilderness of Ziph, Saul comes down and he's sold out by the Ziphonites. And so then he flees over here to En-Gedi. And then now Saul caught him and he spares Saul. And now he's over here and he's moved away again. And so if you notice, he just keeps going further south away, which he's trying to stay away from him at the same time. So let's go ahead and jump into in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and starting in after Samuel's death. So we're going to, the last part, go ahead and read there, 1 through 3. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. So we have him moving into an area where we find the very first encounter with Nabal, and we find out a lot about him from just this very few verses. We know that he's a very wealthy man. We know that he's rude, he's unkind. There's nothing really decent about him from this introduction that we have, and he's going to come out and show his true spirit as we go through this. Now, Abigail, the opposite, which, there's so many layers to this, as I discussed earlier, talking about the relationship. When we talk about the characters that we have that are coming into this story, we have David, we have Nabal, we have Abigail, and there's a lot of different ways we can look at this, and we'll try to address some of them without making it too convoluted, I guess. So we have her described as intelligent and beautiful. And so David in the wilderness, and I want us to think about, he's got over 600 men with him, and he's got to be able to try and supply them. How do you feed? Now, I don't know if I don't know that there was only 600. I have a hard time believing that it was just 600. Possible. I know that some of the families, even his own families, his parents, he took them over to Moab to be over there during this time in the wilderness and such. But even just the numbers of 600 to try to feed that amount of people on a daily basis, it's a huge logistical nightmare. I know when I was in the National Guard, when we had over 500, the amount of logistical supplies that we'd have to requisition. We'd have to look at the number of soldiers we had, and we had a certain formula that we'd put on it. And I mean, when our supply trucks would go down to the logistics and come back, we're talking like 5-ton trucks to just cover us for a 2-week period. Of course, I'm sure we're probably eating a little better than them. I don't know. But I just keep thinking about, how do you feed this amount of people? The other thing is, it made me wonder, I guess because I never really thought about it that much, is what are they doing? What do you do with these guys? Again, I've been in, deployment situations, and soldiers that sit around and do nothing, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for, possible disciplinary problems. And, so they're just, what is their purpose? We know that David is providing good leadership, that they're obeying him. We know that whenever they engaged with Saul, that he was able to, use a spiritual guidance to keep them from killing Saul. But, when you talk about having 600 men moving around the wilderness trying to avoid the king, try to keep morale up. How do you keep them focused? And I think that what we're going to see is how that they were doing this. So you're going to have to really rely upon the people in that area, the people who live, the inhabitants. We see that during many warfare where armies that are moving through an area, whether they're on your side or not, one of the things you do is you take advantage of the local crops, you take advantage of the livestock, and you use them. You acquire them, and you use them. And that's why sometimes, that militaries that are retreating, what would they do? They would salt the earth, shoot the animals, burn stuff down, so that the army coming in couldn't live off the land. So that's a part of what's going on here is the way that they're surviving is that they're having to live on the goodness and generosity from those around them. So at this time, we find where it's a very festive period. So let's go ahead and read 4 through 8, a time when they're shearing the sheep. When David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it's sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with me, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time that they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.'" Like I said, if you were having to survive in a situation like David, I could see where a lot of people wouldn't ask. They would not be asking. They would be acquiring it and just taking it from people. So it really reflects the idea that this was David's interaction with the people around them. We also learn that he's doing something. He's not just sitting out there, but he's actually doing something with his men. And I think that would be very important. And I think the attack on Keilah, whenever the city was being attacked, he inquired of the Lord, "Do I go? Do I help them?" And the Lord instructed him to do so. And his men, remember, they were like, "Whoa, we're being pursued. We're going to come out of our hiding place." And so he inquired of the Lord again. So he goes out and he defends the city. But, of course, he has to flee. So you see this, that when David hears about these things that are happening to people, that he takes that responsibility and he goes. This is the king's job. Where's Saul? Where are the soldiers and the government that should be taking care of them? They're not doing it. They're not doing it. So David, it's not his responsibility. And if anything, it's a little silly because you're exposing yourself. Hey, we're down here. We're down here. They're not hiding. They're out there, and they're known for what they're doing, and they're protecting those that are around them, and they're making sure that they're not being raided. Now, if you look and you remember the map, they are very far south in Ishmaelite territory, we'd call it. We know that the Philistines on the west side, the west coast area, they were coming in and doing deep raids in without any real consequence. They were just people without any impunity were coming in and just taking and whenever they wanted. Saul's not doing anything. So you could see that there's this same type of a threat probably going on. And so David decides, well, this is a time I'm not going to impose, because he understands that this is a time when they bring in all the animals, they have them all together, and it's very festive, and they're shearing the sheep, so he's in a good mood. We never think of this, but don't you think David knew about this guy? I mean, a little bit of sheep talk around the flock, that his men and stuff may have been talking. I mean, David seems to know things, and it makes sense because, a lot of times you put sentries out in order to guard and to gather information and warning so you know what's going on. And I think that David knew about this scoundrel, this guy, and his attitude. And if anything, we know that the soldiers of David, the men of David, were interacting with the men of Nabal. And so I thought it was kind of interesting that, that it was a festive time. If you're going to go ask a crank, do it whenever maybe he's at his he's in a better mood. That's kind of minor, but look at what he tells him when he says, "This is the message." First off, it's in my name. Tell him it's me. And so I believe that David was known, which later on we'll see in Nabal's response. But he's not just saying these guys are showing up and begging that this is me, David. And he really is giving him blessings. Long life, good health to you, your household, and all that you have. And so he's setting a humble position of request, not demanding, hey, I've been out there, I've been providing security, and you have to give this to me. No. And he says, if anything, if you want to check to make sure that we've never molested, we've never taken anything, you're not missing anything. If anything, you are safer because we existed and we were providing a wall around your property. So that's, we've come at this time, so please give your servants. And he calls him, this is a sign of humility of son David. But whatever you can find for them. He doesn't even say, look, I got 600 men to feed. A lot of food, man. I need some help. I need at least this many of sheep, this many goats, this much. No, he just says, whatever. Whatever you can find. The generosity in your heart that you want to provide for us is what we would be satisfied with. But we see that starting in 9 through 11, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" This is really one of the most insulting things, and it fits, of course. I think one of the first things I notice, if we look at that verse, it says, and they waited for the response. Now, I understand there's, sometimes you have to wait, but I think, I really believe there's a larger delay in here that's kind of a little disrespectful instead of just, because you're going to have to wait for the response. I mean, I'm sure that, but there's this sense that Nabal's not responding. It's almost as if maybe he's not giving them the respect. And I think his answer really does highlight the fact that he is giving them no respect. So he answers when he says this, "Who is David?" Really? Come on. Do you think he doesn't know David? I mean, he even says who his father is. And I think you would, a man at this level of wealth and influence and business and all the things around in that area there, I know they're south, but there's a lot of activity going on about the king's army coming down. You move 3,000 men and the king's down there. What are they doing? What's going on? And I think there's a lot of rumors and information passing along. It's not like we have today that, on local news, David flees south, or, a certain email comes out and alerts everybody. No, they weren't getting the same type of message, but they were as hungry to know what's going on and as curious And you know how people talk. Something bad, exciting news, it's going to get around. And remember, the proclamation that Saul himself said in Gedi was, he is going to be the next king. There's a lot of things that it's starting to really come out into the open. And if there's one thing, is that David is very favored, Saul is not. David has a history of being a very powerful warrior and very successful warrior at that. David is the one who took down Goliath. Come on, tell me that story didn't get around throughout all of Israel. How about all the Philistines that he killed? Come on, you telling me that Nabal doesn't know? I mean, he even says, he calls him a slave. So he's identifying, and it's the most insulting thing that you could respond to somebody like this. And you notice that it's my. It's all about Nabal. And this is where, when we start to look at some of the relationships that we can apply, I think some lessons we see is the generosity that he is requesting and not demanding. We know that there is a lot of references, and we can look at the likeness or the similarities or the foreshadowing of Christ in David. And when we start to see this is one of these historical events that is starting to transition. Remember, we talked about how, David goes from the being a shepherd boy, unknown, to a rise in the palace with Saul, a glorious commander, successful, son-in-law to the king, to then everything just gets knocked away from him, down to where he's in a cave at Adullam by himself. And then we find all these rejects come around him, and they're running for their lives. And now this right here is a change, because by the end of this story, David's life is starting to take shape in a different direction. And there's a part of me that says, boy, it took long enough. But we find that David, as one who starts out with this great generosity, or great humbleness and requesting, is met right back with, he calls it evil. He believes that it's something that's very evil. And it's very insulting. So why should I give anything to this man? And there's a part, if you separate yourself and just think about the world and your goods, this is the way the world responds to somebody that's in need. They respond by not responding, not identifying that there's anything in your life, as if there's no request. And then when they do, it's kind of insulting. I think of James when he says, your faith is pretty dead if you sit there and your brother is in need and you just tell him, hey, be filled and go home. You don't do anything about it. There's something about this type of response. And so now, in David's response, it's not what I think we would expect after what we find, the way that he had shown such humility and long-suffering and grace to a man who was there to kill him. It's an interesting transition, what way he responds. Whenever David, starting in verse 12, when David's men turned around and went back, and by the way, that in Hebrew is like they just took off. They about-faced and left, and they went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. And David said to his men, each one of you strap on your sword. So they did. And David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. My first response to this, I remember thinking about this, was, yeah, David, go. This guy's a scoundrel. This guy's horrible. I mean, to respond like that, all that you've done for him. But is this really the right response? Does this sound like the guy who was crouched down in a cave? He's got the most threatening thing to his life right there in front of him, and he won't harm him. Even when he cuts the garment of the king, he feels so guilty about doing that. To now, he gets a report that somebody doesn't want to give up what's theirs. I mean, you did ask you asked for their generosity. You didn't send a demand. You didn't give them an ultimatum. You just said, and whatever you can find, give. Well, he found, I've got nothing. So what, but that's not at all. David has taken this, and now that impulsiveness, that part, I think, that just comes out in him, and it's anger. Anger. He just decides that, this is insulting. And so he tells everybody, how many, to grab your sword and let's go. How many people does it take to wipe out Nabal, you think? I don't know. I mean, he was a rich man, but I do know that David's men versus a lot of these, no. When we looked at the mighty men of David and looked at some of these guys, and it's over in 2 Samuel, but these guys are warriors. And you're going to go at Nabal with 400 men. Not go down there and think, well, maybe there was some miscommunication here. Maybe there's something that isn't right. But he's going and he's already made a judgment. And he's executing his righteousness upon them. And he is set with the sword to go down. This is where I think we find one of the most beautiful spirits in the Bible. We find Abigail. We found, as in the introduction to this, that she was intelligent and she was beautiful, and she's married to this rotten man. So let's go ahead and read 14 through 17. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time that we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over, see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. You notice they don't even go back. They can't even approach this guy. This guy is not going to listen, but they know where to go. That's what's interesting, I think, is beautiful, is that they know that there's somebody reasonable. They see that there's a great threat. Nabal sees nothing, because as his name is, it means a fool. But they go to Abigail, and they express the whole story to her. And, of course, then they say, we have disaster pending. I don't know what necessarily gave them that idea, or the soldiers as they were turning about and starting to head out, saying something or indicating it. But that entire engagement there was enough to where the time in between that the men had gone and left, and these guys come to Abigail, that meeting left the impression that it was not going to go well, that David was going to return. And so there may have been some threats aside from his men, but they clearly see the foolishness of what their master has done. And so they go to the one who can possibly do something. And they report the same thing. These men were very good to us. They didn't mistreat us. And on top of that, when we were close to them, they didn't even go in and take stuff. They didn't take any sheep and stuff. So to me, that shows a great character and a lot of discipline on the side of David's men as well, and not taking something that's from them. But now this has come to a heating point. And so no one can talk to this wicked man. There's some interesting background when we start, or in the Hebrew language when you look at this, and it's a pretty potent description. And of the foolishness and the wickedness of the way that Nabal is responding, and that I find it interesting that they don't have a problem as well expressing this to Abigail. It's almost, this isn't the first time. This isn't the first time that they've had to come and walk up to her and say, hey, your husband did it again, or, something that's going on. So what does she do? She acts quickly, decisively. And Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 sheaves of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisin, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I will follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. I tried to figure, if you look at the weight of the amount and how to prepare it that quickly, this alone was quite a feat. But she didn't consult with him. She knew that this wasn't something that was going to be approved by him, that he's a fool, he's hard-hearted. And she took action. She took a decisive role in saying, I'm going to protect the households. Because I don't know that she was necessarily concerned about his particular welfare as much as everybody's welfare. She was looking out to everyone that was involved because of the devastation that was fixing to come because of his behavior. And so, she quickly takes action and prepares all of these supplies and decides to take action. And then we see that she had sent them out to go out. Let's start in verse 20. And then she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there where David and his men were descending toward her. And she met them. David had just said, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. Does this sound like David? This is, I find this very interesting that it's almost like this temper, this anger that is, driving him to go down and to kill and wipe everyone out is causing him to keep himself talking about this and stirring himself up and just building up this anger to help possibly justify his outcome, because there's nothing about this that really fits with a lot about what David is. This is just not him, and his madness, this anger is almost making the same level of actions the way that Saul has done to him. He doesn't see this at all. There's nothing right about it. And he's right as far as, yes, I have done something good for this man, and this man has rejected me. Can you really necessarily take it down to saying that it's evil? Okay, maybe it's not customary, but David, don't you remember your message? You said, whatever you find that you can. You were humbly requesting supplies from him. And now you have taken this to be such an insult. I think that's kind of the problem, is that he has now seen this as a personal insult. Now, he may be also caught up with the idea that his men are starving. They're hungry. And he tried, I humbled myself as best I could and reached out. And then all you've done is deal with me this way. But then in verse 22, he makes a hasty vow here. May God deal with David. So he's saying, may God deal with me. Be it ever so severely. So in other words, God, bring it on to me, even if it's severe, that if I don't kill everybody by morning, then punish me. Does this sound like the psalmist that we read about and expressing a lot of it? But he wants everyone dead. I can't imagine this. It's one thing to go out and to kill Philistines, people that are harming, go out and defend, and in the process of defending, having a mission that's justified, defending the children of Israel, fine. I get it. And it does create a heart that is very different from a person who has never murdered somebody in combat. And I say murder, I shouldn't say it, but it is. It's taking of a life. If you've never killed somebody, that first one now I never have, but from soldiers, what you will witness from them is that first one is the one that haunts them forever. And after that, it starts to get a little easier. And they have to do that to protect themselves, because it's not in us to naturally be murderers. Now, there's a few people in our society that they have no emotions and they can do this. But almost every veteran that you see that has been engaged in this type of warfare, and we're not talking about a weapon, a rifle that you can stand off at 300 yards and shoot it. We're talking about hand-to-hand, close quarters, watching and looking in the eyes of people as the life drains out of them. And this is the part that David has let loose in him. This is also a part that we see that when he wants to build God's house, that God says what? What does he say? No, you've got blood on your hands. There's something about that God didn't want him, and I think that this is some of the psychology or something, but he was not in the right frame of mind. Something has allowed himself to get into this warrior mode, and now he's not killing Philistines. He's not protecting children of Israel. He's killing Israelites. It's like, what are you not seeing here, David? Why are you not seeing that you're actually going to be killing God's people for something you have been personally insulted about, instead of trying to catch yourself? So they're traveling through this ravine. We see that Abigail is coming up, and then when she sees him, this is what we find in 23 through 25. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and she bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." So how does she approach the threat? She knows that these men have been extremely insulted, and now they're coming. I can't imagine the courage that she had to have as she is approaching and seeing these men coming at her. Remember, David is sitting there milling this around in his mind, just retelling this insult, and how could this guy do this, and all that I've done, and he's evil, and come along. And then all of a sudden, here's Abigail. Before we know, she's never met him, but I think she is courageous and spiritual as well, because of the things that and the way she handles this. And her initial approach is extreme humility. She gets off of the donkey. She gets down and bows her face down and at his feet, and she asks for forgiveness. Now, what does she have to be forgiven for? She's actually acting as somebody who is, trying to intercede in between the violence and the judgment that's coming upon the household of Nabal, and said, "Let me speak. Listen to what I have to say. Don't listen to my husband." His name is just like it means. He is a fool, and everywhere he goes, folly follows him. And so then going on, and as for me, your servant, so now she started out with apologizing, begging forgiveness, and then she says, "As far as me, I did not see the men my Lord sent." And she's talking to David, the men that you sent. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my Lord, be given to the men who follow you. Wow. Where? On YouTube? I don't. We'll check it out. Daria. I'll talk louder. Yeah, I got so busy yakking I forgot to look down, but we'll check it out. Good to have you with us, though. So look at the way in the message, and this is where, we start talking about the providence of God. This whole event is going to switch the dynamics of David's journey in the wilderness. You have this fool who, this isn't the first time he's probably been so insubordinate and rude to those around him. He's extremely wealthy. I don't know how you could put the dollars to it, but based on the number of animals and everything that he has in the area of the land and everything, it's a very rich, plush area. He is probably among the richest in that area. And it just reminds me kind of the rich fool who says to himself, man, I've done good. Look at what I've accomplished. And then somebody comes up and says, hey, can I have some of that grain out of the barn? I mean, I'm mixing my stories here, but it's almost, what do you think he would say? No, I got to fill up the other barn over here. He's got all this extra. And this man has done something good for you. But then, so when she says, the Lord has kept you from bloodshed. So when is that? I'm asking, what do you think? From what? Saul? That is a That is a point where, the Lord, in the sense, whether it was a spiritual moment in that cave, wasn't it, where he realized the Lord said, no, don't touch Saul. But how would she know this? It's still, you're correct. But there's something so deep in her engagement. And this isn't the last. It's, she gets more prophetic in the way she expresses this message. It's almost as if this is something that is coming from God through this beautiful woman. But how does the Lord stop us? I tried to think of that. How would he stop you and I? Because there's nothing, honestly, that we can say that where it's written in the scripture, where, that here's David sneaking up, and all of a sudden the Lord said, "Stop, David. Don't do it." And that's something that we see, that this, the spiritual side of David that is so connected and wanting to serve God. Just in the same way that the Spirit works with the apostles, we see that their behavior wasn't controlled and manipulated like a robot. We can read the New Testament and see that there are times where, like Peter, in one moment, he can't seem to figure out what those dreams are that he's having in Joppa. He keeps having them and having them. Well, why didn't the Spirit just go, "Peter, don't you get it? Meat's good." And then he gets in Cornelius' house, and what does he do? "What do you want?" "Huh?" And then he goes to Antioch, and he's standing there, he's acting all hypocritical, and Paul has to get in his face. So what I'm getting at is, when we look at the working of the Spirit, many times it's in ways that maybe we're not necessarily going to understand it, but the way that he is already, in the way that Abigail is expressing this, is that he's already kept you from shedding blood and avenging yourself. So that's a key word right there. I want you to think about avenging yourself. What do we know about avenging yourself? Doesn't this seem justified? My men are starving, man. He's insulted me. I'm the anointed one. I could hear all sorts of justifications that he could say. I even think Nabal, I'm kind of presuming, but I know that there are some historians believe, yes, he even knew that he was anointed. But I don't know that I can presume that Nabal even knew that he was going to be king necessarily, but, he definitely is somebody who's extremely successful and being blessed by God because of all the favors and all the things that are positive that are happening to him. And so the way that the Lord has stopped him from taking the vengeance of himself. Who's this vengeance? Where do you get your vengeance from? Righteous vengeance. What's the source of righteous vengeance? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, right? We hear that all the time. Vengeance is mine. And I just thought it was interesting. Here's Abigail saying, the Lord stopped you from saying, David, I'm going to get my vengeance. Because that's what he's on the road to, isn't he? He's on the road to getting his own vengeance. And it's like a little reminder here, the Lord has stopped you from shedding blood. So there's a lot of ways that you can get revenge, or vengeance, I should say, not revenge, but vengeance for an injustice. It doesn't always mean murder, but it's been to the point even of killing that the Lord has pulled him back because it was a vengeance for himself. And that's not something you take upon yourself. And that's why it's so interesting that this is the guy that was crouching in a cave who had an opportunity that if he had any justification to take vengeance, it was right there in that moment. And he had such an amazing, beautiful response. He contains his own men and saying it's not right to insult the anointed one of God. And, I would be scratching my head and say, wait a minute, you're anointed too. And we went through all that. But no, he understood that, no, Saul is still anointed. He is still somebody that is serving, and it's not for me to take him out. What happened to that guy? It's like he's gone from, all right, let the Lord deal with this broken anointed one named Saul. I'll let him handle him, but it's not right for us to do it. To now, this guy who says he's not going to give you supplies, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to wipe them all out. And he took a vow that if I don't do it by morning and have them all dead, then let the Lord bring something severe upon me. And she kind of says, you know what? May your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal, be like that fool. And let this gift be the gift to substitute for that. Here it is. But that's just the beginning of this beautiful message. It's kind of a small print, but I want to capture the rest of this 28 through 31. Please forgive your servant's presumption. I love that starting. I'm sorry, I'm going to pause on that. Because a lot of times when people present spiritual thoughts, I think this is something that maybe the humility in us should also kind of, I think, express this idea that I'm not presuming to know your life or what's going on, but this is something that I think is spiritual and something that's needful. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone in pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought you, my Lord's success, remember your servant. Doesn't that sound like a prophet? I mean, so what does she starts out? She is identifying that he's going to be king. I just find this as well very timely, and I think providentially for David. And the Lord is using Abigail as a very spiritual tool and a learning moment for David to think about what he's fixing to do. You know, how many times we look at moments where we're set on a path, we made a decision, and we're going to go. We're going to go for it. I know myself at times when I've been insulted, I've been injured, because of insults or something. It's so easy to get caught up and just forget about what's going on, thinking that what I'm doing is righteous. But what I'm really doing is more harm than good. And understanding that the Lord is going to put things in our way that are going to try to hinder us from making these foolish decisions. And she identifies it because you are doing the Lord's battles. You are doing that. But, and so on the other side of this, is this the Lord's battle that you're doing right now, David? This is not what the Lord has been having you do. You have been taking care of God's people. And so you're going to continue to be successful, but I think there's something here very, very beautiful when she says something, these words here. May the Lord be bound securely in the bundle of the living. And there's two things here. And then when she says about hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. Now, the first part, maybe if we're not as familiar with shepherds, but if you think about the way that the livestock would move, and a lot of times you'd have to pick up, it's not like he had a big backpack, that he packed his tent and put all the stuff in, but apparently it was something very customary for, shepherds to stay light and be able to move, that they kept what was important wrapped close to them. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting the way that she's using this wording. And then, what do you think of when she talks about the pocket of a sling? Nabal was not aware of exactly what all was going on. Because people like to talk. I mean, what a great little story to talk about the king throwing spears at this guy. I mean, think about all the stories. You talk about like, what are those Hollywood magazines, the tabloids? I mean, that would be beautiful stuff to talk about. People haven't changed. They would love to. It'd get all over the place. And so they do know who he is. But this is very, and I'm not trying to take away from Abigail. I mean, but there just seems that there's a lot more of a very precise spiritual message as well that's coming through. And I think it's because she is somebody that is very spiritual, that the Lord, again, is connecting these two in a level in which they both may not be completely aware of. Now think about, she's been living with this man. Is this possibly an answer for her as well? I don't know that people have looked from her side and thought, how long she's had to put up with this guy. And now, the end result's going to be that she's going to be blessed as well in this engagement. But the idea of the sling, what do you think of? Goliath. You think of this. And she says, that the promises, when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel. But if you go through with this is the other side that she's saying, if you stop now, my Lord's not going to have this. I like the way that this is the ESV, staggering burden of needless bloodshed, which would be a result of him avenging himself. And so, and then she closes it by saying, remember your servant. Remember me. So David, I think that was that spiritual ice water he needed to stop him and bring him back into his right mind. So there's another part of this that I think that we need to realize is that sometimes we need to listen to those around us that are spiritual. Sometimes we need that type of intercession, that we as well need to be courageous to approach our brethren in Christ to help them as well sometimes when they're starting to get caught up in a path in which is going to cause them more harm than good, even though they may think it is. So David said to Abigail, 32-34, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left by daybreak. So he acknowledges it, and he's thankful for the fact that she had the courage, that she came out and stopped him, and because of your good judgment. And you have stopped me from actually creating a much worse situation than what, he sees it finally. And this is something about the spiritual heart of David in which I think we need to have as well. And we're going to see this again. This isn't the first time, but this is the first one this is the first time I see this link to David's heart when he becomes hardened towards things that he will not let go of, and Sheba's going to be the biggest one. But here, he repents. You can see this in this man, that yes, he will sin and he will make mistakes, but the one thing that he will do is he will change. He will see it, and he gives her thanks for stopping him from going through with that and basically murdering and having innocent blood, because it's not just Nabal he's going to kill. It's everyone, all the men. And he even says, harm for you. Because if he kills all the males, who's left? What happens? In that day and age, it would have destroyed the estate in a sense. It would have been something. So now she goes home, and we read the reward of what I call a foolish man in 36-38. And when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding in the house, holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So did David get his vengeance? Through the Lord. Notice that when Abigail comes home, he is, again, I just keep going back to this guy, the man with the richness of all the crops that he says, I've done so well with myself, I'm going to build me another barn. Here he is at a banquet, like as if he's a king, and drunk, very drunk. And so he's already a fool. You can't really talk to people who are drunk anyway, that are that drunk, and then you tell him, and he's already a fool when he's sober. So she plays it smart. Just wait. But she doesn't hide anything. You notice that's something that as well about her character, is that she's not being deceitful in anything that she's doing. And so she tells him. She could have hid this. Well, I don't know how long. But in the morning, when he was sober, then she tells him. And it says his heart failed and became like a stone. I've heard a lot of different interpretations of what this means. There are conditions that it can describe, but I really think that looking at this, I think it was a stroke. Some form of a heart failure that put him down and sick, and in 10 days, he dies. And so then we see really the reward of a righteous woman. And in 39 through 41, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." And she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant, and I am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servant." And so we see that one of the things that, again, David sees, he waited. It didn't happen on his timeline. But what happened? Well, Nabal did receive his just rewards in a sense for what happened. Now, and again, like I said, there's so many ways we could just continue to go on in this, and I'm not, but I think this, again, when we look at this event and the idea of this righteous man who's after God's heart, we see all these beautiful things he's done, and all of a sudden we see where he then has a change of this anger overcomes him, and he's been insulted, and then what does he do? He turns around and goes out of his mind and goes down to try to take vengeance. This beautiful, righteous woman comes forward, brings this message to him that stops him in his tracks. But, she's suffering as well. She's been having to be married to this man. And so there's a part where she as well is going to be rewarded in this. And so when he extends this, when they get married, think about the change. This is what I was saying about the change from going from being a scavenger and asking and begging to now he is going to inherit and have this estate and great wealth because of Abigail. So I know we're running a lot of time, and so I don't know how more succinct we could try to make it, but I want us to think about this is a change, because now we're moving from where David had gone all the way to the bottom to a cave, and he starts bringing up these men, but now we're starting to look at some spiritual lessons of a man who's real, a man who's challenged with the same things we do, that at times we become overwhelmed emotionally and we take our own actions. And it takes somebody who's very spiritual at times to step up. And I think that message was, in a lot of ways, prophetically coming from the Lord providentially to David. And then we see that Abigail as well becomes blessed. So I know we're right up at the top of the hour, so I'll let everybody, if you got some comments. There's a lot of stuff we've covered, so I know I didn't get it all. probably shouldn't have tried to pack it into 1 hour, you know.
I want to have a quick moment. I was thinking about something I hadn't really thought about before. So it says this is the time of the shearing of the sheep, which is the spring. It also says it's the time of a feast. And it occurred to me that it's very likely that it's describing the feast of the Passover or unleavened bread or something like that. So what they're asking for perhaps is to participate. It's not simply a request for food, but it's also a request for food.
Figs, the raisin, the things that. Yeah, that's a very good point. We don't have a specific identification of what this day was, but Brian was saying that this is you look at the time of the season and they're shearing sheep, and you look at Passover, that it's highly possible that this is the Passover time. And when you look at the way that Nabal is responding and the way that he's acting, it is, in a lot of ways, very insulting. And then to get drunk and to live like you're the king, when, if anything, they're supposed to be reflecting on the idea that we have just been delivered out of Egypt and that the Lord had passed over and saved us and rescued us from this. And it was time to be very spiritual. And the other way around, he's talking about and thinking about, look at all the sheep. Do you see that? Do you see all those sheep I had out there? Wow, look at that. You see all that wool we were able to get? I mean, he's thinking of himself. And so it is. It's right the opposite.
I think he says in verse 8, we have come on a feast day. And I think feast day is the word, the term there is the word for it.
Being in the spring when they would shear.
And spring is when they shear, so, ones I would think of would be Passover. I mean, it could be as late as Pentecost, and it'd still be spring, but it'd be the end of the spring. But I would think probably Passover or, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But it's, it was a day that wasn't, this generosity wasn't just a generosity in general. It probably had more.
It was a feast. Yeah. It was a specified feast by Mosaic law, and him showing it. That's what is interesting is the multi-layered. I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff about this as the bride of Christ, Abigail, David being Christ, looking at the way she intercedes for him. And I was going to, there's just a lot of different layers to this, but I just don't think it's something that's very deep that you could dig into. But I do see it as a very critical time switch from where he's dependent on everybody to, in a lot of ways, he is going to be gaining independence. Another thing interesting is they only have one son, one child together. And he apparently, he doesn't get murdered by Solomon. You don't hear about him, which is good. That means I think it reflects on Abigail again of being a righteous woman that, her son grew up spiritual and didn't rebel like Absalom or cause any other problems, which that family dynamic was very complicated, to say the least, right? So, and what a blessing that Abigail really was for David in a lot of ways, in the way that she presents herself. She stopped him. And, that's the other thing is that a lot of times we look at the empowerment of women and the influence that they have on us. And to try to say that somehow that Abigail was a second-class citizen, her humility and her behavior, if anything, I think demonstrated a tremendous amount of power. But you see, if you try to associate your role according to the way the world does, then she just embarrassed herself, right? It's just embarrassing. Why would a woman do that? But look what she did. Look what she accomplished. She used the culture, she respected it, and she was rewarded for it. And she interceded for it. I just lost, but there's a couple of other biblical stories where women intercede. The one is Joab, when they're pursuing Sheba, and the rebellion, and they go and surround the city. And they're basically Joab's going to go in and burn the place down and kill everybody. A woman comes to the wall and says, so what's going on? Well, we got a problem with the guy, Sheba, in there. And he goes, hold on a second. Goes back in, and a head comes flying over the wall. It's like, you don't think she had some power? But so there's just a lot of richness about, I think, the tremendous value and power that women have on them. And I think the stark contrast between such a fool being married to such a beautiful woman and him not see it. And I think this is a deliverance for her, too. That was a good comment about the feast. I probably slighted that a little bit more than I should have. What do you got? Any comments? Thoughts? Like I said, wow. I was wanting to divide it, but I thought, well, I want to try to wrap the essence of this all up in one. So I don't see any comments on chit-chats or anything like that. All right, everybody. Well, we're going to go ahead and log it off. I hope we'll get to see you Friday morning at 10 o'clock. We're going to have the Bible study on Search for the Church. And if not, we'll see you Sunday.